All right, well, I guess I will just get started and hope that things go better. We will see. Okay, good. So Claire got in first with asking, would you mind sharing some stories on working with difficult developers? The difficulties can be caused by both technical and non-technical reasons. Um, I mean, I've got a lot of cases of this. Most of the people who were difficult to work with, I respected, but it didn't make it any easier to work with them. So there was one guy who I worked with in my last job. Actually, he was another principal engineer in a different area, and he was really, really good. I mean, he had great design instincts. He had been a developer in the area for, I don't know, 6, 8 years, which is much longer than I'd been in that team or in that area. And what I found was every time that I tried to get something done, he would want to really drill down and understand all the good and bad things that could come out of it. Oh, well, what about this corner case and this corner case? Uh, the questions he asked were good, but it made it quite difficult to make progress forward. You want to figure out the important things ahead of time, and then you want to start pushing forward and fleshing things out. Because if you spend all your time designing ahead of time, then what you'll find is you'll think of three really good things that you're glad you found, and then the other three things that you really need to find, you'll find as you go, and you'll be glad you bumped into them. That sort of implies to me that it's not necessarily worth spending all that time up front figuring out every little corner case. So what I found with him was, I just had to kind of talk with him technically. The other thing that made it really difficult to work with him is he was simply non-responsive. So, send a mail, try and get a meeting invite. He'd accept the meeting invite and then not show up. Set up a review, he would accept the review and then not show up, or he would just not respond until it was too late to do anything about relatively important meetings. This is a person who was heavily oversubscribed in his group. In other words, he had way more work to do than he could possibly get done. So I understand where he was coming from. It's a necessary evil. You work with the things closest to you that you're directly responsible for first. You work with partners second. You work with random queries that you don't know what their importance is last. He was just prioritizing, but it didn't make it any easier to work with him. So I guess that's one story of a good guy who was hard to work with. Um, let's see, I'll give you one more story about somebody who was difficult to work with. I had another person who was very assertive and very out to get as much face time with the executives as they could. So this person would always try and get time on agendas and be able to present what they're doing. They would present things that I didn't necessarily agree with technically and which had implications for my area. And so I'd find myself in this, bad position of either having to confront them in front of executive management or letting them say things that weren't true. Ultimately, I usually wound up, saying at some point or another in that discussion, saying, well, I think it might not work quite that way, or at least my understanding is somewhat different. And I might also circle around and talk to whoever the executive was afterwards. But this person, it was really difficult working with them because they had a very specific idea of what they wanted to get done, and that was their top priority, and they would stomp all over me to make it happen. So that wasn't cool either. So there's two stories, Claire. Let's see. Let me get rid of this little pop-up here. Uther1 says, some younger employees don't quite realize executives know exactly what they're doing sometimes. Yeah, there's I remember myself when I was just starting out, there was a lot of mystique. I paid a lot of attention to what level people were. So like if a VP, for example, over my 200-person group, where I was just an individual contributor. It wasn't my 200-person group, but if the VP would come and ask questions, I'd be like, "Oh, we have to do it. The VP's asking." I just sort of treated everything they said as law, and I guess now I have a very different perspective where, these are just people trying to get their job done. They've got 8,000 different things they have to do, um, but ultimately, most of them don't want you to do the wrong thing. So if they're asking you to do something that's going to wind up being a problem, then you tell them, well, I can't do that right now, or it would push these things out of the way. Most of the time that works okay. Sometimes you do get forced to do things in the name of executive relations. But yeah, so anyways, the other side of that is oftentimes managers talk to managers and they talk to their managers and spread stories about good or bad things. Or one common technique for executives and for upper managers is for them to drill down on something just to make sure that the people who really own that thing are paying attention to it. So they might find out from one of their other reports that, oh, a test failed this morning that doesn't usually fail, in Alice's area. Oh, great. So then that executive comes, and in the next meeting they have with Alice is like, oh, Alice, by the way, what was that failure in blah, blah, blah this morning? Alice will say, Alice had better have the details at the tip of her tongue and be able to get them quickly. And so typically Alice will say, oh, yeah, that was a problem with this and that. Oh, who works on that? This person. And so you might find that the executive, through this random drill down, winds up knowing what somebody's working on, mistakes they made, and the rest of it. It can have a disproportionate effect on their impression of that person just because they only get the occasional data point rather than a good snapshot of months of work from that person. So then suddenly the manager has to make sure that they do a great job of keeping the executive a little up to date on what Alice is up to and why Alice is a great person and should be in line for promotion, etc. But yeah, the executives, it's their job. So it's mostly their job to communicate out, but it's also their job to make sure that the people running things under them are doing a good job. Adelphosphos says, would love your thoughts on fostering a healthy engineering culture, red flags to address early, and good behavior to reinforce. So I think you left a comment on the channel about this, talking about the possibility of having something that talks about engineering culture. They had something like this at Amazon. I think it was called Code Ninjas, where people would get together. It was usually a mix of SDE 1s, 2s, and 3s. They tried to get a principal to attend each of the meetings, at least in the area I was in digital, where they talked about interesting code problems and what was going on with it, issues with how things were being built or getting things done, all kinds of different things. They just tried to foster a sort of culture of people getting used to working together and making things happening. It's a good idea, but it does absolutely take some effort. The other way that I've seen this done at the places that I work in is to have like weekly or bi-weekly, every 2 weeks, tech talks where somebody will offer to talk about a project they recently finished related in the area or a technology they investigated that they think will be useful for other people and so on. And as part of that tech talk, you also have a lunch or just sort of get together and blab afterwards. So I think what I did when I was doing these in MSR in Cambridge, UK, was that we would have a talk every week or two, but after the talk we would have pizza and have people just hang around and talk and socialize and sort of informally network. This relates to another question people have asked, which is why do you need why can't you just work remotely all the time? Why is it useful to get together in person? And the answer is there's a lot of informal communications, water cooler conversations, and so on that you get just from being around people that you lose out on when everybody is remote and has to explicitly choose to connect up. There's a higher bar there for communication, and it winds up with some of the scuttlebutt and some of the softer things getting dropped on the floor, which is never great. Let's see. Do I have any other questions? Okay, that's 3 questions so far. So let me take a look and see if I believe I had a list of other questions that I was going to answer if we had time. So let's take a peek here. If I can find it on this lovely page. Yeah, it's coming up. Alex, stream health. Aha, there we go. So another question that we had was a multi-part question from GK, which was they're a software engineer in their late 20s with 7 years of experience. What should they do right now to keep their edge for the next 2 to 2.5 decades? Should they be a manager and climb the ladder? Or should they just be more in-depth technically? And if they work in a financial tech company today, would they need to move to one of the mangas to keep having a good career? Now, I can't answer that second part. I can't say that you have to move out of a fintech company to advance because I don't know how far you can advance as a technical person there. I do know that they pay very well for whatever level you happen to be. Whether that comes with promotions and a good career path is maybe a different question. But in terms of whether you have to move to management, I don't think so. I moved back and forth between management and being an individual contributor several times. I mean, On my posts, I put that I have 13 years of management experience, and that's true. But it was bouncing back and forth between a manager, manager of managers, and being an individual contributor. And what I found was ultimately, in terms of being able to advance your career, you don't have to be a manager. You can have just as good a career, just as good a career prospects, and get paid every bit as much as an individual contributor as you can as a manager. And just like IC path, the farther up you go as a software engineering manager, the more difficult things get. It can actually be quite difficult to advance after a certain point. Like at Microsoft, getting past principal and into the partner band is really pretty tough. You have to do some impressive things, and you really have to have the chops for it. And that's true whether you're an individual contributor or a manager. But I would say being a manager doesn't really give you any advantage in moving up. Instead, focus on the type of work you enjoy doing and the breadth of impact you want to have. As a manager, you generally aren't quite as broad as, say, a principal engineer, because a principal engineer is touching usually a larger set of folks than the manager, but you have a lot of stuff that can be directly attributed to you in the people you're managing and what those teams are doing. All right, let's see. Earthor1 says, do you think there are things to improve on that most software teams don't do? Is there anything that most software teams don't do? I don't think there's any big thing missing that folks aren't doing. The way I look at it for running software teams is there's a couple of basic things that you should do to make the team work well. I actually just finished editing a video this morning that's going to be about process, the good or the evil of process. And that I'm a ways ahead right now, so I can take some time off this summer. That'll be coming out in mid-July. And that talks a lot about the sorts of things that a team should do, what they should have set up, how they should go about making sure that they have a good check-in process and good designs, and that the project can move forward, especially without alienating people on the teams. So that'll be coming out soon. What I would say is you just need a set of best practices. You need to have an idea of what you want the code to look like. So you need coding guidelines. You should have templates for the different types of design documents that you need. You should have a process that things go through as people are proposing new components or new entire features or products, where they have to put together a case for it, and then they create a vision for it, come up with requirements for it that sort of say, it must do this, it must do this, it must do that, and it's this important, and this is the reason that it has to do that. So those would be a set of requirements. And then you come up with an architecture that talks about how you could write some software that will meet all the requirements or meet the important ones. And then after that, you might put together a design spec, and the design spec will go a little deeper into the actual algorithms that are being used and some of the key data flows and so on. And then after that, you might put together an implementation spec, and the implementation spec would go into how you're going to satisfy that design. It might include class names. It might include the actual interfaces that you're going to export and things like that. And then maybe a testing plan and a release plan. You put all this stuff together, and then you have formal milestones that you're trying to reach. Even if you're working in Agile, you still have a set of features that you want to get done. The decisions work a little different in Agile than they do in Waterfall. What that means is you every week or every sprint, you're trying to get a set of things done and watch it working, and then you make a decision: are we ready to ship this or not? And then you move forward. I've been seeing Agile used in commercial software companies that release things that take a year and a half to produce. They don't necessarily get a lot of bang out of it. You don't really make a ship decision every couple weeks, but it still winds up being the same sort of thing, where you had an idea where you were going, you proposed a set of things that everybody agreed, yes, let's fund a team to do this work, and then once it gets far enough, you ship it and call it good. And of course, you need to have good tools and good practices for every team. In other words, making sure that you have a good way to file bugs, that people can find them easily. There can be discussions about their priorities, whether they need to get fixed or not, that you have a way of evaluating the risk and the cost of any particular bug you want to fix or feature you want to add. All that's part of a good team working together. I personally like to have weekly or bi-weekly meetings for the team. I used to think they were a complete waste of time, but it turns out, as long as you do it right and don't make it too wasteful, it can be really a great way for everybody to see what everybody else is doing. You need to keep the scope to the right level so there's not a ridiculous number of people in there, but it's a very good way to foster a sense of community and understanding what people are doing. Otherwise, if you don't know what two other people in the group are doing, how are you going to know if you're working on the right stuff or priorities are changing or anything else? You want to be in contact with your teammates. Okay, there's a bunch of rambling that hopefully sort of answered your question, Arthur. Mir Ali Raza Khan asked, there are times when when in the interview I may not have a story for a particular behavioral question. How do you tackle that? That is, that is really rough. There's a set of typical things that people ask for these behavioral interviews, like, oh, where do you want to be in 5 years? Where do you want to be in a year? What inspired you to become a software engineer in the first place? What's the hardest challenge you've faced? Tell me about a time it was difficult to work with somebody. Um, what I would say is you sort of cast a wide net in answering the question. I tend to get a little flustered when I answer these questions, and so I have to kind of keep repeating it in my head. Okay, so he needs to know a time where I had a lot of difficulty working with somebody. So I'll think and I'll say, well, do I have any examples recently? That's the lowest hanging fruit that you'll remember the most about. And if I don't, then I cast a wider net. Was there anybody who was a real pain going back a ways? So no, huh? Well, actually, the funny thing is, one time this vacuum cleaner salesman came to my house, and I wound up having to meet with him 5 different times. So I might find a personal story that talks about this. You kind of reverse engineer what they're looking for when they ask this question. Tell me a time you had to work with somebody who was very difficult. The question really is, do you have to go get somebody to help you when you have a difficult problem? Or do you approach it confrontationally? Or do you approach it collaboratively? Or do you try and understand if there's a misunderstanding? They want to see which way you approach things. And so don't tell the story where you had the hardest time with somebody. Tell a story where you had a hard time with somebody and they where you resolved it amicably or well, or maybe you had to just cut things off and say, I'm sorry, it can't work, but where you didn't cause a bigger problem that had to be escalated or anything. You want to show your judgment and your empowerment to deal with the things that come up, and that you've thought not just about what's going to happen tomorrow, but what's going to happen in a year or 5 years or whatever. So pick a story that fits those constraints for whatever they asked. And then what I usually do after I finish telling my story, because I have a tendency to wander, as you may have noticed, is that I'll say, so, when I'll finish up by saying, so when I have somebody who is difficult to work with, I try and figure out a way where we can both win and blah, blah, blah. I just try and summarize that thing that I think they're looking for. I won't lie to mention it, right? So I tend to maybe compromise a little too much on things. So I might say something like, I would really try and make it work with a compromise. It doesn't always happen. If it doesn't happen, I guess I'd have to take a look and see whether I'd have to escalate it or whether we could just sort of let it go, and maybe they could come back a little later after they think of an idea. But you want to kind of finish it with the thought that you want them to write down in their feedback about you. All right. Really difficult, too much context specific. Yeah. Uther's saying too much TDD, too little TDD. Yeah, what I've found at all the different places I've worked with her, going back to your question about are there things that are easy to improve everywhere, is the needs are different everywhere and the culture is different. So at Microsoft, they've been doing agile stuff for at least 10 years, because I was running sprints there in 2010, 2011, and that was in a services group. And even today, some of the people who I was working with in Azure 2 years ago, they were very much from the box development, the box product world and the box product management. And so the things that you might think of as the best practices for Agile and so on, they just wouldn't be productive with that team. You have to pick the right tools for the set of people that you're working with to be productive. And then you have to kind of slowly move the needle towards an ideal direction you want to go. And the other thing that I've found is the ideal tends to shift over time. So what looks great and perfect today is not going to be the right thing to do in 5 years. So, yeah, I wish I had a piece of easy feedback for you on that, but not so much. Okay, and yeah, you're welcome. I love answering questions, and I like thinking this is going to be useful to people, so hopefully it will be. So Carlos says, quick, quantifiable question, QQQ, I don't know. Hi, in big tech, what if an engineer specializes in something, such as kernel dev, and reaches senior and then wishes to move to a different area, such as Android? Will he start from junior dev again? No. I've never seen that happen when moving within the same discipline, such as a production software developer. I've moved around a lot. So if I started out working on core operating system technologies, and then they needed multimedia, so I was working on wave audio drivers for sound cards when sound cards were first being introduced to PCs, and CD audio and video and things like that. And I was specializing in that for a little while. And then I wound up going to networking, which I didn't know a whole lot about, but I knew something about. And suddenly I had to dive very deeply into networking protocols and RCs and things like that from the IETF. You can look up these acronyms if you care about them later. I'm happy to talk about networking until my face turns blue. I was like, well, oh, now I understand how these networking protocols work, because I owned I owned the test development side of 3 different network protocols. And one of them in particular, IP security, was intended to be an interoperable protocol run by a bunch of different software stacks from a bunch of different vendors, and they all needed to be able to authenticate and talk with each other. And then I wound up working on games for a little bit, and then I wound up working on what did I come back and work on? I guess peer networking stuff, where I was working on security rather than networking. So I did a little networking, but mostly I was becoming an expert on security and cryptography. And then after that, I wound up going to research. And anyway, I jumped all over the place. I've probably been in more disciplines than anybody who's not at least 20 years old. Who hasn't been working for at least 20 years has been in. And I constantly either make a lateral switch, or occasionally I might. Well, actually, no, I've never gotten a promotion moving around, but I've never had to take I've never had to take a demotion. I've never had to take a pay cut as part of moving around. And generally speaking, companies that are hiring you, they don't like to hire you for less money than you're already making. The reason is, even if you think you'll be fine with it, and even if you say you'll be fine with it, they're worried that you might start thinking, after you have a couple of cushy months or a cushy year, you might start thinking, this just isn't using my talents. I could be making so much more money doing something else, and you wind up moving. I mean, this happens more often than not, which is the same reason why you wonder, why can't I get this easy programming job? I know I'm super overqualified, but that just means I'll do a better job and I'll be happy doing it. Well, who knows how you'd feel in 6 months? People hiring you certainly don't want to take that chance unless they don't have any options for it. Yeah. So, anyways, even moving, like I moved from working on box software, then I went to I guess I worked on services at Microsoft a little bit. I moved to Amazon, and suddenly I was working on Android and Kindle, without ever having done it before. No change to my pay, no change to my level. So I think that's fairly typical. All right. Tarun says, during your time as PE at Big Tech, were you doing side projects? If not, how do you try to grow outside of your job, or is that not possible at that level? I'm going to answer a broader question. I'm somebody who has had lots of different side projects he wanted to do, working on game servers for fun, for example. Writing, I love writing sci-fi, looking to writing technical stuff, playing lots of games, being administrator for games, a little bit of research. And what I found for everything was, whenever I thought about doing it, I thought hard about, how good am I going to be at this thing? How long is it going to take me to be that good at it? What will I produce? And what will I feel out of it? Of course, nobody knows the answers to all these questions, but these are the questions I'd ask myself. And what I realized was, YouTube included, if it takes a significant amount of time, even if it doesn't take a significant amount of time, it just can't hold a candle to what I could be, how many people I could be affecting, and how much I could be earning if I was working in big tech. So for example, I got monetized, I guess, 3 months ago for this channel. Thank you everybody for watching. And so far it's been about $160. And I can tell you, just for the equipment that I use, I've spent over $1,000 in the software and the rest of it. I don't care about that. I'm mostly just trying to give people information that'll be useful to them, the stuff that I wish that I knew when I was starting out or when I was in the middle. But in general, yeah, I didn't do the side projects. I worked on startup stuff a couple times while I was working a full-time job, and it just wound up being too distracting and too much of a being tugged in different directions, feeling like I can't do my best work at work because I'm tired from these things I had to do not to block the startup. So I don't generally do side gigs. If I'm going to do something, and among other things, once you get up to principal, at least in my experience, you always have more to do than you can do. So you're having to pick the things that aren't going to get done. And if you're saying, well, I have 10 things and I'm going to do 5 of them, you say, well, I'm going to do 3 of them and I'm going to go work on this startup over here with the other part of my time. You know, that doesn't work for me. If it works for you, that's great. But you also have to be careful because oftentimes the IP agreements you have will say technically the company you're working for owns anything you make. So if it's not successful, well, nobody cares. But if it turned out to be something that was worth money, it could be a real hurdle for you to get over later. All right, ta-da. Kendall asks, what song, loud or quiet? I'm old, so I like old music. The normal things I like songs that are cacophonous. Like there's a Oingo Boingo song called "Cry of the Vatos," and then there's another one called "Polaris" by I think Bostich. That's just sort of random noises put together. I like listening to things like that that sound so disorganized that they don't pull my attention away. It just kind of instead lets me focus on what I'm working on. Or if I'm just really need to focus on something, I guess I'll put on like a softer electronic music like Jean-Michel Jarre or something like that, or Philip Glass. I really like the soundtrack from Koyaanisqatsi and Powakatsi. Both those are great things that don't pull any of my concentration away and help drown out the ambient noise around me. So good things to do. And if I really have to concentrate and get something done, then I will turn on a white noise, either a white noise generator or a white noise audio. Maybe like a rainfall audio if I don't have the white noise. Benji asks, have you heard of Microsoft vendors before? Do you think they have a better chance of joining Microsoft as an employee? I currently work as one. I was hoping for some advice. So one of my stints at Microsoft, I was at Microsoft from 91 to 90. Yeah, Mongolian throat singing I also really like, but I don't know if I could listen to an hour of it. So the things have changed over the years with being a vendor. So there's generally 2 types of vendors. One of them would be a vendor who's working, for example, they're full-time employed by full-time employed by another company like HP, and then they're working on site at Microsoft. That would be a typical vendor at Microsoft, and they really they could set up contacts to work at to get a job at Microsoft eventually, but that would typically be considered sort of uncool, because you're not supposed to steal from your partners in terms of people, although it happens. And then there's another type of vendor, which would be somebody who they used to just be contractors working through an agency. Like Volt was a big agency at Microsoft. They may still be today. And what they would do is the bigger tech companies, they like to work with the agencies or with the vendors because it indemnifies them from damage from somebody who misbehaves. So, for example, in the 90s, I worked as a contractor at Microsoft myself because I could make 3 times as much as a contractor as I could as a full-timer. I wound up only doing that for a year and before I switched back, which is a whole different story. But anyways, the back then, you would work just as hard, you would get an office, all those kinds of things. You'd be treated just like a regular employee until the contractors, even though they were getting 3 times the money, they watched the stock go up and they were like, hey, we work just as hard as everybody else. They even give us an office. We deserve to have stock. We deserve to have other things. And so they changed all the policies for dealing with contractors. And they had, contractors, especially on the test team, were maybe a quarter of the people. So we had a big period where we spent a year interviewing and deciding which of the contractors we would offer full-time gigs to and which ones would have to go and work somewhere else. And so the ones who got full-time gigs, yeah, they got converted and hired on full-time. And I imagine this may still happen today, but it's problematic because of those lawsuits that were raised in the 90s with big tech companies. They're hesitant to hire on a contractor. There's certainly anti-compete that will, for example, if it was with Volt, they might have something in the contract that says, oh, by the way, you're not allowed to hire our people our way. If you do, you owe us a year's wages for them at whatever you hire them at. Something like this. So they are more likely to wait to convert somebody, but it can still happen. And having people familiar with your work and proving that you can work at a certain quality inside of a big company is a really good foot in the door. It may not be an immediate, mean an immediate job, but at least you get contacts and you say, well, I'm going to keep working for this place for a while, but hey, when I come back, do you think I could ping you and see about a job in your group? And usually people be like, oh yeah, I'll hook you up. I'll give you a referral, and that can be incredibly valuable for being able to come on as a full timer. Uh, but you have to tread carefully with all this stuff because the companies are not super excited about it. The vendor companies aren't super excited about potentially losing their people, but it's possible. Uh, let's see. Tarun, thank you for support for Patreon. I also have mixed feelings about trying to make money on this thing. I'm okay taking money from Google that they're already making anyways because I'm posting these videos, but I'd feel bad about taking, or I'd have to really consider about taking money from people who are earlier in their career. Right? I'm old, close to retirement, so it's not like I have to do this or I'm going to starve to death. Let's see. Big tech can be very stressful. Have you experienced stress and burnout? How did you handle it? I'm going to make a whole video on this sometime. Yeah, I got burned out early, actually. Uh, I'll spare you the story on how I got burned out, but what it boils down to is I worked myself too hard, and I took too seriously the calls for getting more done from folks. And so I would, in my worst weeks, I literally worked more than 100 hours a week for like 6 weeks, and that was devastating. I think I never really recovered from that. By the time another half year, a year had passed, I was just completely burned out. I felt I was in my early 20s. I felt like I was trading my youth for money. So here I am. I have these dreams of being a writer and making games, whatever else. My friends are making shareware and they're supporting themselves that way. And here I am working at the big bad Microsoft and just doing nothing else, not dating, not doing anything, not having time to do anything. I'm selling my youth for money. And so I was like, nope, not doing that. I had dropped out of my master's degree to go to Microsoft, and I don't think I'd finished it at that point. So then my girlfriend at the time wound up going to CMU, and I was like, you know what? That sounds great. I can go and see if I can get a job somewhere in Pittsburgh, and I can take some classes, finish up my PhD if I want to. Or not PhD, my master's. I can do some writing. I can do game stuff. I can do shareware, and I did all those things. It was really a huge relief going from just being sick of it all and burned out at Microsoft and putting in 60 70 hours in a typical week to being a star performer. I actually got a job at the university through my girlfriend, being a star performer just for showing up for 40 hours a week, because lots of the people who were staff were more focused on their life than, and taking class and finishing up whatever story brought them there as a staff in the first place, than working hard for the school. Which is fine. There were also people who worked harder than, not as hard as at the big companies, but still worked relatively hard there. And of course, the people who are working as faculty, they're in a different class. But if you're staff at a university, it can be a pretty cushy job. So the way that I recovered from burning out, first of all, I felt that I was burning out. It's the burnout isn't. It's more than just. At least I draw the line at more than just being a little sick of things and needing a vacation. It's a point where you don't feel like you can function anymore, where you're feeling depressed, and where it goes on for months, and it's not getting any better, and there doesn't seem to be any hope on the horizon, and you just don't love the things you're doing. You don't even like the things you're doing anymore. You don't like that discipline, and so I wound up leaving, focusing on other parts of life for a while sort of holding down a 9 to 5 job, just putting in 9 to 5 and doing all the things I felt like been missing. That helped me recover over a year. Another year after that, I was bored because it's like, well, this isn't enough. I want to be doing bigger, more important things. I mean, it's fun. Don't get me wrong. The development, the research was fun, but it didn't have the impact that when I was at Microsoft in those couple years before I burned out. One of the things that I worked on was a friend of mine had built CD player from scratch, and then I wound up finishing it for him. And so I was one of the 2 people who did the main development for that. And it's this application that shipped with every copy of Windows, and everybody knew what it was, and everybody used it. And I just got such a big kick out of that, thinking, well, sure, it's just audio, but it makes a difference to lots of people. And I couldn't say that about anything I was doing at university. And so I wound up going back to Microsoft first as a contractor, and then switching back and taking a full-time job again. And I've been crunching since. After recovering from being burned out, the main thing that I had to do is I realized both from managing people more and from observing myself, I don't ask people to work unsustainably hard. There can be a very rare exception to that, but in general, the way I look at it is, a person in their career, it might be 40 years, and a given project is going to be what, 6 months, a year and a half. Hiring somebody good, especially a senior somebody good, can take years. So why would I risk a good employee by letting them burn out or by encouraging them to burn out? Instead, I want them to work as hard as they're comfortable working, so that they feel fulfilled, so they don't feel like they're selling their youth, and it goes better. And so I worked sustainably hard from that point forward. And if I found myself in a role where that wasn't good enough, then I wasn't likely to stick around. So anyway, yeah, that's burnout, how you recover, and then how you keep from burning out again. Unfortunately, everybody kind of has to find their own limits. You learn it through life. This is one of those things you can't really learn from anybody else. All right. Let me go up. Big tech, very stressful. How do you, Erroneous says, how do you find balance in your life between the career side, projects, hobbies, break time? I feel like there's always something I can do for work and just end up being worried about wasting time. If you find yourself spending too much time at work to the point where you don't feel like it's healthy, the most useful two things you can do are disconnect and partition your time. So by disconnecting, I mean you read email or you're on Slack or whatever until the weekend hits, and then you explicitly log out of it on your devices and you stay off of it until Monday morning. Maybe you check it Sunday night or something, but you make sure you have at least one day, and ideally 2 days of the weekend, where you're not listening to anything at work. Maybe you'll miss chiming in on something that came up. Maybe somebody have to wait till Monday for an answer to their question. Boo-hoo. That's we all wind up doing a little bit of extra work anyway. So I would say, first, partition your time so that you really have a clear division between the work time and the playtime. That may also mean using a little discipline while you're at work to keep yourself from doing random stuff and doing as much web surfing or shopping or whatever you do to kind of entertain yourself. When I'm not feeling productive enough at work, I will usually try and set a rule for myself, which is basically no reading news or anything like that. If I'm not working, I'm sitting there staring at the screen. I can't do anything fun. And the most I can do is get up and get a coffee or a soft drink and come back and sit down. And if you force yourself to sit there at the screen feeling stupid for 20 minutes, it does help motivate you to do whatever it is you didn't really want to do that needs to get done. So yeah, partitioning, and then shoot, I forgot what the second one was. But anyways, just having discipline about what you do and making sure you carve out enough time for yourself to do the things you want to do. And I would also say one mistake I made in my first two and a half years that really contributed to burning out was not taking vacations. I didn't take weekends off. I think I added it up, and it was something like 11 or 13 days I took off in 2.5 years. I'd go into work on Christmas. I'd go into work on whatever day, even if I was the only person there. Snowstorm, I'd figure out a way to go in the office. Not because I had to, but because I felt like, well, this is where I need to be. I need to be here and get some stuff done, I was a person driving myself, and it was a stupid thing to do. There's a time and a place for heroics, and the time and place is not every day all the time. Let's see. Okay. User123 says, if you want to climb up the ladder at Fangam-like companies quickly, should one transition to being a manager rather than an individual contributor? No, you don't have to. And in fact, I would recommend against it unless you think you'll make a good manager. So if you're good technically, the best people technically can get a promotion each year. I've seen one or two people who've been able to do this and made it. The guy I'm thinking of worked maybe 14 or 15 years total so far. Maybe 17. He's a principal at Google now, which is like being almost like being a distinguished engineer at Microsoft. Certainly like being a partner. And he just cranked his way through by being good technically and always getting the right things done and not doing too much of the wrong things. you can absolutely make it as an IC. And managers bump into dead ends too. If you don't have an aptitude for managing, and if you're not getting better at managing over time, you're not going to get promotions as a manager because there's other people who are great. And there's only so much budget for promotion. Only a certain fraction of people in a given level bucket can be promoted each year, and it's not going to be you if you keep screwing it up. So no, you don't need to be a manager. Being a manager probably won't get you promoted any faster unless you're great at it, and you won't be promoted any faster than somebody who's great at being an IC. What are the most useful? Uther one asks, what are your most useful books I've read? Do I have a most useful books list? The answer is no, I don't have a most useful books list, and I haven't found many books useful. I find making things to be more useful for me. The one exception is there were books called Effective C++ and More Effective C++. These were two books that had a bunch of tricks and explanations about things that work well in C++, and those I found to be very valuable. But otherwise, yeah, books weren't too much use for me. Even when I was trying to get up to speed on a new technical area, I found it was better to read code, to look at examples, and to read standards instead of books, which is its own special hell, but it winds up being more useful, at least for me. Non-technical books. I read a ton of sci-fi, and that's still my fun thing. Like right now, I am working my way through. I got hooked on The Expanse, which is a sci-fi space series that I just love to death. Um, and I've been working my way through the books now. It turned out I'd read the first Expanse book before the series ever came out and didn't realize it was part of the Expanse. I read it. It's confusing, but it was good. I never followed up on it. Now I'm in the middle of book 6 of the series. Great stuff. And if you like sci-fi, then I would recommend, if you haven't looked at these folks, Orson Scott Card is a good author. Greg Bear is a good author. They're both relatively old, and actually so is Ian M. Banks. Is just awesome. Okay, let's see. John asks, what advice would you give someone joining a company as a staff or as a staff plus engineer? Choose your manager. My advice for somebody who's joining a new company at the staff level or at the principal level is choose your manager carefully. So the only time I really had there were two times that I had trouble joining a company at the principal level. One time was when I picked a manager when the manager that I wound up working under had just joined the company themselves, and normally at this particular company, the principal is sort of a right hand man for the director who they report to. In this case, neither of us could bootstrap the other one. That wound up being a little bit of a hiccup at first, and it sorted itself out later. But that was a situation I would have avoided. I had a choice of a couple different groups. I would have gone to the other group with a manager who had actually been there for quite a while instead, and that would have worked out better. The second thing I would say is see if the manager has worked with bringing senior people in before. So the second time it went poorly was when I had a manager who'd never hired a senior person from outside. They'd only hired senior people from inside the company. As a result, when I came in and I didn't know how to get work done at that particular company, it was a real problem because they needed a principal doing good stuff right away, and I wasn't able to. And I wound up getting demotivated and not being as productive as I should have. So I'd also say, if you come in as a senior person, get another peer nearby who you can find out the right process and map all of the experience and knowledge you have from other places into how things work at that company. It's surprising how different it can be and how traits and behaviors that are valued at one place wind up being considered inappropriate at another. For example, taking time to write a really solid architecture for something. At another place you go to, they might be like, well, what? We don't have architecture docs. We have a vision, and then we have the implementation spec. I mean, why are you wasting time on this? You want to make sure that you're working on the things that are appropriate in that environment. And you need to think of it that way. You don't think, I'm a super principal or staff plus, I know how to get things done. You think, how do these types of people get things done in this place? And that's absolutely the right way to approach it. Let's see. So going back up a little bit, what advice would I give to joining? Okay. Drake says, have you encountered managers who overwork you promising promotion and don't give you one? How would you deal with such managers? The short answer is no, I haven't. The managers who overworked me, like mercilessly overworked me, never promised a promotion. They were just like, this stuff needs to get done, get it done. I don't care how. If somebody is dangling a promotion in front of you, usually a promotion requires a particular set of skills be demonstrated. If they're showing you something that doesn't fit that set of skills, you need to be convinced that those are the right things to do. So, for example, the things that might be important to get promoted to senior from an SDE2 is you might need to work on something that impacts the whole team directly. You need to mentor other people in the team, and you need to have some relationships outside of the team. If they're telling you, I want you to just focus on this one piece of code that nobody else needs to look at and get it done, and then I'll promote you. There are rare cases where that'll be true, but um, but it's probably worth a friendly conversation about, well, hang on. So I took a look at the level guidance, and it sounds like I'd still need to do all these other things. I mean, can you explain to me what if I do need to do those other things, what are the steps we need to take? How long are we talking about? If they're dangling a promotion in front of you, then get into specifics and make it a conversation. Make it a friendly, non-confrontational conversation. I have a couple videos on how to do one-on-ones, and one with a clickbaity title of how to get promoted faster in hours a year, and that's really all about this relationship and this discussion with your manager. So I'd say check those out. Make sure that your manager understands you're interested in getting promoted. Make sure your manager understands you're willing to do work to get promoted, including making sure you're working on the right things to meet the bar for that next level. And go and look yourself at the level guidelines and the promotion guidance at the company, if it's formally written down, to make sure that you're going to be on the right track. Don't forget, your manager can leave in half a year or a year. They can leave before they ever give you that promotion, or there can be a reorg, or 100 other things can happen. You can't get around depending on and working with people, but you also don't want to be in a position where everything that's important about the way you've spent your last year, maybe it looks bad from the outside, it's all in your manager's head or one person's head. They could disappear, they could get sick, anything could happen. All right. Let's see. Carlos says, hi again. If someone wants to do machine learning related work in big tech, is a master's or PhD a must? I don't think so. The people who I knew working in machine learning when I was in research, sure, they were PhDs because it was research. When I was in product teams, they didn't necessarily have advanced degrees. If they had advanced degrees, they didn't have anything to do with machine learning. There's different parts of machine learning you can work in. One is the infrastructure, the machine learning infrastructure itself. It's just like working on operating systems, building the Android operating system for a phone if you want to work on phones. Or maybe you want to make applications that take Android for granted. Maybe you want to use machine learning and apply it to domains for recognizing things, for clustering, whatever you're going to do with it. If you're going to do that, it's a lot better to be somebody who's a domain expert in the area you want to apply ML to, and to have some idea about the data and the things that work well with ML. You don't need an advanced degree for that, in my opinion. Let's see. User123 asks again, if somebody's very good at interviewing but mediocre when it comes to actually getting the job done, does it make sense to jump companies and up level rather than staying at the same company? I'm one of these people who usually interviews a little better than he is, and no, switching companies is incredibly painful. Don't fool yourself. There's a honeymoon of a couple weeks, and it's more true the more senior you get. There's a honeymoon of a couple weeks, and you start feeling lost for a while, and then you feel really lost for a while, and then you start getting the hang of things, and then it gets to normal, within a year or so. And this is a stiff price to pay. I mean, I've got a wife, I've got a kid. Imagine me being a mean ogre around the house while I'm dealing with all this stuff that's happening. It's just not worth it. So you pay the price, and hopefully you stick around for a while if the job is a good fit. And if you get promoted, great. And if you don't get promoted, work on the skills that matter for going to the next level. They're fairly similar from company to company. So the shape of the design might change, for example, but the fact that you need to produce a large, impressive design to get promoted, that's going to be the same everywhere. So hopping around and trying to get some sort of a promotion, moving and getting promoted is risky. The reason it's risky is because you're moving from a job you already can't do, in this case, to a job you really, really can't do someplace else. That's not setting you up for success. It's setting you up for misery and giving you a bad reputation and making the company you're joining miserable. Why wouldn't you want to focus on doing a great job, learning how to do a great job where you're at and just paying your dues? That's what I would recommend, even though I'm not so good at doing that myself. That's what I would recommend. Um, Tips about finding a good manager in a new job. It is. You know what? I've just given up on being able to do it. The way you find out if you have a good manager is you see how the first 3 or 6 months go. Because the things that I've done to try and make sure I have a good manager, there's twice where I thought I had the coolest, most intelligent, friendliest, happiest manager in the world. And and they were brilliant and they were good at what they did, but it also didn't wind up being a good fit for me working for them, and ultimately that caused problems in the relationships. There's just no substitute for actually working with somebody to see if they're going to be a good manager. On the other hand, it's easy to spot a bad manager, and that's somebody who has very high attrition in their group. Whatever the reason is for that attrition, whether it's them as a manager or whether it's problems in that group where it's being defunded, that's not a good place to go. So I usually like to find out if a group is growing or if it's been if either it or its business has been growing over the last year or two when I'm interviewing. So I'd say look for a group that's growing and hope for the best. Let's see. OneBetter. Hi, thanks for doing this. I'm a student trying to contribute to open source software, but the real world code base is too big and complicated. How can a new contributor start? This is a great question. I'm going to have a video on this sometime. It's on the list. The best thing you can do when you first join a group is try and get something a little done. First, you try and just enlist in the source, or pull a copy of the source down and be able to build it. And then you try and make sure that you can look at check-ins, list the check-ins other people in your team have done. So you look at all the check-ins by your coworkers, and take a look at the ones for the last, 10 or 20 check-ins they did. And then you pull those up and you take a look at what's in them. Now, when they're doing a check-in, unless it's something like, fix my spelling of color to the American spelling or something like that, then this is going to show you a set of related functionality that has to be changed together to achieve a purpose. By doing that, you get more of an idea of how the different modules of code fit together. And then that lets you start learning what the variable names mean and the nomenclature and all the rest of it. So if you follow through those a couple times, that can help. So you look at the diff between their check-in and what came, their commit and what came before it. Another thing you can do then is just make sure that you can build and run under the debugger or in the test environment the code itself. Make sure that you can run unit tests, and then go and change one little piece of code and explicitly break it and see if you understand how it breaks and see if you can debug it in the debugger. That is an extremely useful skill. Get more familiar with the output for developers like trace logs and things like that. There's almost always logs or metrics that you can look at that will help you understand what's going on. And usually when you join a new team, you'll have a mentor of some sort you're working with. So you might meet the manager the first day, but typically you get a mentor who's also relatively new. And you sit down with them, they help you get started. And I would also, just try and get them to walk you through some stuff. Make sure that you do a fair amount of work yourself. Make sure that you have tried to answer any question that you're asking yourself for at least a little while, and you can reasonably say what you did to try and find the answer. That will go a long way in keeping people friendly for continuing to answer your questions. So again, make sure you can enlist in the source code, make sure you can build it, that you can run it, and run it under the debugger. Read some other people's check-ins to it, get an idea of how the code fits together. And then after all this, you might go and see if there's ask the manager or your mentor for a recommendation of a bug or two that you can work on and try and fix. There's nothing like actually doing the work to help you get involved in it. Also, do code reviews for other people. Don't necessarily be the person who signs off and says, looks good to me, but you can look at it, comment on it, and read the comments of other people to get a feel for how things are. And don't wait too long to do your first check-in. You want to show that you can contribute to the team within your first week or two. It doesn't have to be a big contribution. You just have to show that, hey, I'm here and I'm trying to get work done. All right. Let's see. Do the very best ICs work 60 hours a week, or do they work 40 and work smart? Working smart only gets you so far. The best ICs that I've seen most of them work more than a 40-hour a week. Um, and unfortunately, that sets the bar so that if you're a good IC who doesn't work 40 hours a week, you get less done and you don't look as good compared to them. So, but the good news is they're usually passionate about what they're doing. They're doing it because they enjoy it, not because they feel like they have to. If you're forcing yourself to put in that extra time, I'd say, have a hard look at what you want to accomplish out of life. We get paid pretty well, whether we're great performers or whether we're okay performers. Even, you know, even an entry level developer these days makes more money than per year than any of my relatives or friends who aren't software engineers will ever make per year. So, wanting to get promoted and wanting to move up, you need to keep these things in perspective. You've got a great job. And as long as you are competent and reliable, if you're only putting in 35 hours a week and only getting a certain amount of stuff done, that can be okay. You do have to move up a little bit to keep from being marked as somebody who should maybe be cold to make space for somebody else. But even at 35 hours a week, you should be able to do that as you learn and get better at your job and the rest of it. So don't worry about this competing with people at 60 hours a week. Worry about finding a good balance for yourself and what you want to accomplish. And remember, it's an enjoyable job, but it's a job. There's a world outside of the job that you probably want to pay attention to. DevMan123 says, if you're on a good collaborative team with a good vibe or a work-life balance, what kind of raise title bump would make sense to move? 10%, 50%? Only if big tech? Oh, that's a hard one. A lot depends on what you want to accomplish. For me, I really like working in big tech. I like working on software that's going to be used by millions of people, that affects billions of people. That, for me, is a big kick. It's a big hoot. So everything else being equal, that's what I would look for. Even if it means I have to work a little harder, as long as it's work I enjoy rather than, I don't know, sorting tiles or something. I wanna be doing some design work and data mining and things like that because I enjoy them. You have to. Everybody's going to have a different point where it's enough money that they think that'll be worthwhile. But I would caution you to. I would ask you one thing. What are you going to do with the extra money that you'll make if you're leaving a comfortable, happy place to work? And are you ready mentally for the 6 months or year it's going to take for you to get up to speed and be productive and happy at that new place? If the money is just more dollars going into a bank account that you're not touching, so instead of saving 10% of your salary, you're saving 30%. That can be good, but if you don't have something in mind for that money, if you don't say, I want to retire at 50 rather than 60, or I want to be able to give to charities, or I want to buy my dog a house, whatever it is. Remember the trade-offs you're making as you go through life, getting older and having less time left in front of you. And there's a lot to be said for being happy and comfortable. Having said that, you also want to make sure you don't get brittle, but that's a whole different thing. So it's all going to depend. 10%, 50%, it all depends. You're going to be someplace closer to home. That's a big plus for me. I'd lose some money for that. Daniel says, any tips on being a good mentee? Yes, absolutely. Too often, mentees come to the mentor and they're like, oh, teach me, show me what to do. Tell me how everything works, I'm here, I'm your sponge. And meanwhile, the mentor is typically somebody who they like helping people out. They've got a fair amount of experience. Maybe they want to put a little tick mark. I've been a mentor for 3 developers this year, whatever it is. But ultimately, you have to decide what's important to you, and you have to decide what you accomplish. As I've been a mentor for people, my favorite people I've been a mentor for have been the ones who came to me with something they wanted to accomplish or do. Sometimes it's very straightforward, like I'm an SDE3, I want to make it to principal, right? Sometimes it's, I'm having a lot of trouble working with other groups. I want to be better at working with other groups and having more visibility. How do I do that? These are the sorts of things that a mentor can really help you with. They can have a conversation with you and help you examine what you're doing and the opportunities you have from a different perspective. And that, in turn, can help you make better decisions, better informed decisions about what's worth doing, what's not worth doing, what's a distraction, and what is a deliverable. So I would say the best thing you can do as a mentee is have an agenda, have a set of things you want to ask about and learn. And if you don't, dedicate some of your time to talking with your mentor and saying, I want to, you have to have a goal, right? Maybe your goal is, I want to improve as quickly as I can, or I want to be able to propose my own product in 3 years. How do I go about doing that? And identify a set of things you want to work on. And if you haven't had time to think about things or work on things, be considerate of your mentor's time. And if you don't have something that you really have to meet about, offer to give them back their time. Some of them will take you up on it, some of them won't. But you might say, for example, you have a meeting every 2 weeks with somebody. If 2 weeks have passed and you didn't get a chance to look at any of the stuff you wanted to, ping them a day or two before and say, hey, I haven't had a chance to look into this stuff yet. I don't think I'm going to be able to by tomorrow. Should we just cancel until 2 weeks from now? Mentors really appreciate that. So drive what you want out of the meeting, just like you would with the manager, and be considerate of the mentor's time. Those are the two best things you can do. E.M. Banks, yeah, E.M.M. Banks is awesome, no doubt. My favorite books. Uh, Nguyen Duong says, "Hi John, thank you for taking time for the Q&A. What are your thoughts on new technology product that isn't widely adopted yet? Examples are like autonomous driving, AR, VR, XR, blockchain, etc." My thought is, there's so we live in a social world, social networking and people touting things, people trying to sell things, and so on. It can be really hard to tell something that's all hype from something that's realistic. Like VR is something that's finally getting a little traction. It's still not a huge thing, compared to what people thought it would be. But I watched it come and go at least, I think this is either the third, probably the fourth time I've seen it come and go over the last 30 years, and it's older than that. You just never know what is going to take off. Blockchain, I think, is I'm still puzzled by blockchain as to why it's a valuable thing. I've worked in peer-to-peer technologies, peer-to-peer security stuff. There's some similarities there, with having change logs with cryptographic bindings to them that keep people from updating them, and some sort of a quorum vouching for things. But I don't get the whole thing, I have to say. So, or in autonomous driving, I was really hopeful for that until it never actually came around. Augmented reality, I think, has some important applications, but it needs to be something that's as easy as putting on these glasses and not obvious and geek-like, and something better than, for example, Google Glass was. So I think it's great to watch things be invented. I'm happy to use them after they've been shaken out a bit. I don't see anything that I'm like, oh, that's the next big thing, and I got to go on that, because my track record for detecting the next big thing is just absolutely awful. I am awful at it. Let's see. Hi, John. Does getting a master's in CS or data sciences add any significant value for somebody with 8+ years of experience? No, it does not. I mean, you can do it if you want to. There's an opportunity cost first and foremost. You're going to be taking some of your time. It's going to make you get less work done. It's certainly going to make you more tired. If you have a real life outside of work, it's going to interfere with that too. And you'll learn things, but those things, just like undergrad school, mostly won't be directly applicable to anything you work on. It's going to be terminology and exposure to things so that you know to go look for them if you bump into something with it again. I got a master's and a PhD while I was working. Didn't get a raise, didn't get anything for them. I got a pat on the back, which I was happy about, but I didn't get them for anything good to happen at work. But yeah, no, it's not useful unless you're trying to move into research. And then I would say you really want to take a look and see whether you really want to try and move into research if you've already been developing for a while. Let's see. The doghouse, yeah. Uther1 says, not a question. Most important thing I've learned in life is to consistently write down questions you don't know the answer to. When you've got a big list of questions, ask your mentor to answer. Absolutely. That is Uther, that's a great thing to do. I would say try and answer them yourself first and come up with a proposal of what you think the answer is, because that's always valued. Wei Hou says, hi John, what is the best way to do a PhD while working in industry? How badly does it affect work-life balance, and any tips? I was an exception for the PhD thing. I was in the UK at the time, and the computer laboratory was literally across the street from the office I worked in. And there was a relationship already between the university and the research lab I was working at. So for me doing a PhD, it didn't require any extraordinary efforts. Plus, I had a very wonderful, understanding boss who was okay with me every now and then prioritizing working on the PhD versus work. So I would, let's say that I was working 55 hours a week, average, if you add everything up, I might drop my work time down to 20 or 25 hours a week for several weeks and focus more on paper stuff when I had a paper deadline or I had to get something done for the PhD. And then I would switch it back and try and make it up, and it all worked out okay. But of course, with that time, I could have gotten more stuff done at work, and I could have had a bigger impact. So the first thing I would recommend is make sure you really want to get a PhD, that you have a good reason for it. My reason to get it was because I wanted to be able to teach at university. Although now I'm getting long enough in the tooth that I don't think I'm ever going to do that. I wanted to have the option. I wanted to have the credential to teach at a good university if I felt like it. That meant a PhD. But if you're a software engineer, if you're a program manager, anything like that, if you're working in industry, you really don't need a PhD. And so the return on investment is pretty low for it. Yeah, and in general, lots of PhD programs, they won't accept somebody who's working. They want you in the PhD program full time. So that was another exception for me. But typically, when I was looking at doing a PhD in the U.S., PhD, the time at the university I was looking at was between 5 and 6 years on average. Sometimes it could be longer. And you would have to take classes, you would have to teach classes, and then you would basically be an indentured servant for your advisor working on their project until they felt like you'd done enough that it was okay to let you go and they wouldn't be too strapped for people to work on it. It's a cynical view of things, but it's a big commitment. So I would be very cautious about doing it. I guess my best two pieces of advice for doing a PhD is make sure that you know what value you're going to get out of it and do it someplace where it's a short-term thing. Like in the UK and many other places in Europe, it's a fixed 3-year program. You don't have this big open interval that it could be going over 6 years, 7 years, whatever. All right, I got time for one more question, and then we're going to wrap up here. Let's see. So the questions are: got my bachelor's, moved to the U.S., climbed the ladder, a VP of engineering. Ah, nice. Is a master's in CS worth it for you for the cred? As an executive, you know what? If you're having to convince people you're worthwhile with a master's, I don't know what that's going to do. I think your track record as an executive is going to be a lot more important than being able to say .ms. And of course, there'll be the set of people who'd say, "Oh, MS. Oh, you couldn't get a PhD, huh? Yeah, that's too bad." So I personally don't think it's worthwhile. And then user 123 says, "How do you ramp up when you join a new big tech company? Will you be looked down on?" If you don't get looked down on for, I'll just answer this one very quickly. You don't get looked down on asking questions to junior engineers. They're actually pretty excited if you ask questions and show that you can learn from them. They get a chance to show what they know to you and establish a relationship with a more senior engineer who can return the favor sometimes. So I don't think that's an issue, and I don't worry about the perception of it. One of the things that I really value in more senior engineers is their ability to say they don't know when they don't know. They don't know, but they're going to find out. That's one of the differentiators. They don't just sit there blocked. They're like, "Oh, I need to find somebody who's an expert in this and go ask them and talk to them about it." Maybe that person has only been working for 2 years. Maybe they've got 30 years of experience. You go talk to them. You can have a conversation and learn it. So you ramp up by splitting your time between learning how to do the larger things you got hired to do and delivering some small things up front so that you don't look like you're just this black hole that doesn't get anything done. All right, and unfortunately, I'm already over an hour, so I know some folks are getting bored. I'm going to go ahead and wrap this up. Thank you, everybody, for watching and for the great questions, as always. I really appreciate it. Am I going to have another Q&A in the near future? I am going to have another Q&A sometime. I'm not sure if it's going to be in the near future. I'm going to be running around for a little bit in the summertime. I've got other stuff I have to focus on for a while. So which is the reason I've been putting together as many videos as I can ahead of time. Like I said, I've got videos up until July 15th now. If I can, I'll have a Q&A, but for part of the time I'm going to be overseas, so I'm not sure how it'll work from there. There could be some weird YouTube thing that keeps it from happening. Anyways, thanks again. Have a great night or a great morning, whatever it is for you. And yeah, thanks a lot, and I'll talk to you guys later.